Ludwig Leichhardt, 1840s, travelled from Moreton Bay, which is now Brisbane, that area, up into Coburg Peninsula. He then came into Kakadu National, or what we now know as Kakadu National Park, and then up into, well, once again, Coburg Peninsula, the most northerly part of the Northern Territory. But on his journeys, he actually travelled through some extensive stands of cypress pine, which he called Frenella. Ludwig Leichhardt, he'd been going through the cypress pine, which he called Frenella, but if you go through his diary, okay, it's changed now to cypress pine, but he comes through, and in the evening he can hear this bird, but he can't see it. It's only when he gets into the cypress pine that he can hear it. Anyway, he called it the glucking bird, so we believe our blue cockatoo, because everyone says, oh, I've never seen a cockatoo with a blue tail. Yeah, I know, but got them all. We call it the glucking bird from Leichhardt's story. It was from there he made it up to Coburg Peninsula, and then was taken back to Sydney by ship, and then from there he set out again, this time to cross the continent from east to west. We're still looking for him. That's way back over 150, nearly, what's it, the 1850s. We believe he disappeared around about Fitzroy Crossing. That's where there's a bit of a gun part found. There was a search party that was actually put out for him to see where he was, and they came down the Victoria River, on the border between Northern Territory and Western Australia. As they were coming down there, they hit a reef, holed the ship, and they got out and they engraved a big boab tree, which is well marked. It's actually just out of a place called Timber Creek. And the reason I got the name Timber Creek was because that's where they harvested some timber to repair the ship. But it was at that time too that Ferdinand von Mueller, who's also quite famous for the botanical gardens in Melbourne, so he was also instrumental, one of the first to actually start to produce eucalyptus essential oil, and then he was sending it back to England, but that was actually came from the Dandenong Ranges in Victoria. But at that time, he got off the ship, went a couple of hills over, and he took the first halotype of Calitris intertropica, which is, he called it Calitris columularis, but now it's been named Calitris intertropica, which is now in Kew Gardens. And that was in the 1850s. But Calitris intertropica is a variety by itself. If you go to the Botanical Gardens in Canberra, Australia, you'll actually see some of the various different cypress pines that have been planted. Baker and Smith went round and they identified the various essential oils, compounds of the timber. Oh, that's 1910 when it was published. 1910 too was the time that there was first trials of plantings of Calitris intertropica in the Botanical Gardens here in Darwin. There's none surviving. They got wiped out by Cyclone Tracy. There's just one stump, that's it. But they found out that it was a really slow growing tree. So at the same time as this book's been published, they're starting to do trials in the Botanical Gardens in Darwin. Prior to this, in about the 1870s, this is the first recorded use of cypress pine by Europeans. There is some evidence that the Macassans were coming in and taking timber back to Malaysia. It does actually smell like sandalwood when you burn it. But the first recorded use by Europeans was when they built the administrator's house on Escape Cliffs in Northern Territory. It was a failed venture, but there are photographs at this time. There's cameras just coming into use at this time. You will actually see that some of the first houses built, or recorded houses built, of cypress pine. This is way back in the 1870s. The Escape Cliffs, okay, how did it get its name? Well, this is just after the Coburg settlement. Okay, there's been a couple of settlements around. There's Fort Dundas is on Melbourne Island, Raffles Bay is on the east side of Coburg Peninsula, and then there's Fort Victoria. It was set up to actually trade with the Macassans, but also a flag waving exercise to keep the French and the Dutch out, and the Americans, who were officially at war with the American War of Independence. Oh, so they're all set up, and that's where Leichhardt walks up into that area. But while they're there, one of the ships, actually a very famous ship, the Beagle, had come around through to what's now known as Escape Cliffs, mapped it, and even mapped out the area of Darwin, that was Port Darwin. Before that, another ship had been there, and they'd actually, they say that they tried to coerce this old Aboriginal man that was in a canoe to get him on the ship. And these days we'd call that blackbirding or slavery. Anyway, he escaped, but the other Aboriginal people were pretty upset, and pretty wary of these ships that were coming in, tall ships that were coming in. The traditional owners, the Warner people, their ancestors, they'd seen this ship come in and the tide's way out, and these two sailors get off their boat and they come up and they start doing surveys. They're surveying the area. And anyway, they look up because they hear this commotion, and they look up, and above them are all these Aboriginal people waving spears at them. So they're mortified, these two fellas are mortified that they can't do anything. The guns are way down at the boat and they're outnumbered. So what do? They broke into a dance, okay? They broke into a jig. Anyway, the Aboriginal people were thought it was hilarious and broke into laughter. And as they were all laughing, they made a run for it and got in their boat and rowed. But they were right up on the cliff, so it was hard for the Aboriginal people to get down, but they could have launched their spears at them, and could have been a different story, but that's how it got its name, Escape Cliffs. And that's the area that the first recorded use of cypress pine is. It was a disaster, that particular settlement, so they moved to what we call now Darwin, which is where I came from, or where I live. They were actually getting the timber from an island called Indian Island. They were bringing it round by ship. And that, in the 1880s, that with Indian Island was the first gazetted forestry reserve in the Northern Territory. So it was the first forestry reserve, but it was all being brought in by ship. Later on, as Darwin's coming up, the overland telegraph lines going through, they started to build railway lines, and it was used for the railway lines and the overland telegraph line. But it was also used for shoring at the town called Pine Creek, about 200 kilometres south of Darwin, and that's actually named after the tree. So Pine Creek, the areas of what we now know as Kakadu National Park, that was logged extensively in the areas of around the Langi, on the Langi Creek, and you can still go to the areas, there was big sawmills set up there, and the areas out round through to Merganella, okay, up Coburg Peninsula, some on the Tiwis, but a lot of logging in around the Kakadu areas and around what we call the Kakadu National Park now, but near Nalangi or Cooinda, around that area there. That was going quite well, but remember the trials at the earlier area of the 1910 had shown that the growth rate of Calitris intertropica was quite slow. In the 1950s, 1956, a man by the name of Bateman was in charge of forestry, and this is just as silviculture, which is the farming of trees. That was just coming in at that time. Everyone else prior to that had been mainly using wild stands. Anyway, 1956, across Australia, there's forestry is conducted, places like Mount Gambier, Aracourt, those places, forestry's up, and they're big towns now running on forestry. But they tried Calitris intertropica here. They planted it in 1956, and we're actually just starting to harvest those trees. That's the ones we're harvesting at the moment. They're the oldest of it. They can be quite big. They're a good sized tree. They've got lots of oil, but they're still pretty small for the amount of time that they took to grow. But it's gross margin per hectare, not how big the trees are. And also, Calitris intertropica is actually defined as the staple commercial product in law. It's a staple commercial product. It can be used for all sorts of things, whether it be for making medicines, repelling mosquitoes, timber. It's a product that can be used for all sorts of things, including recreation such as parks and things. And in fact, after 1956, the Howard Springs areas and Gunpoint, but Gunpoint, Howard Springs were planted from the 1960s up until 1974, and the area around here were planted in 1956. And the actual idea of it was to create resources for exports. The actual complete definition of it is to create work opportunities for wards of the states, which are Aboriginal people. So there was plantations set up on Melville Island, around here in Darwin, okay, around out at Arnhem Land, Merganella, which all Wark. They were manipulating wild stands out there, and also Maningrida. You'll still see that. In fact, if you go out to Wark, which is Merganella, you'll see a big fire watchtower, okay, just near the airstrip. Anyway, that was going quite well. Okay, they were moving on, but then Cyclone Tracy hit. So you'll see the trees, there's some lodgement in the trees. People say that was the reason that the timber industry was shut down in the Northern Territory. Yes, of course, there was things such as building regulations had changed. In fact, you had to build between what, so you could take a Category 4 or Category 5 cyclone. So there were a lot of concrete used, blocks. But prior to this, Darwin had been built of cypress pine, the administrator's house. Well, it's been through the First World War, the Second World War, and also Cyclone Tracy. in the 70s when Darwin was more like a shanty town than anything. Anyway, it blew away. Okay, blew down, and that was Cyclone Tracy. The object of the plantations was to create export industries. So the timber was, okay, yes, the timber was actually, if you plant a tree that you put in $1, you'll get back less than $1. That was for timber growth. For timber, this is Northern Cypress pine. That's actually in the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Expenditure May 1978. But the reason it was planted was to create industries such as everything from under the known technology at that time. That's what we emphasise, that under the known technology. Okay, because the Blue Cypress oil, the chemical reaction, Blue Cypress wasn't documented until 25th of February 1995. That's when I mixed the bark and wood together. Prior to that, the only crystalline substance that was shown to be present in Colitis indotropica extracts is guile. And that's actually documented in the book Baker and Smith 1910. So the reaction's discovered, all sorts of things happen. It becomes the official essence of the Sydney 2000 Olympics. I filed for a patent, I've got the patent now. We had to fight back to get the plantations back from our competitor who the government had given the plantations to. Anyway, we won. Okay, we went to the High Court. We won 2 out of 3 points of law, and we're trading still. And then Young Living came along and saw the legitimacy of our patent and came in behind us and supported us, and we still are being supported by Young Living, which is quite good. Thank you, Young Living, for supporting us. A lot of people ask me, how did I get into what I'm doing now? I was trained to know your product better than anyone else, and then you'd be able to sell it. I was trying to do something else. I was actually looking at game meat, pigs and things to export to Germany. Anyway, then I came across this thing, well, how am I going to deal with all these contaminated carcasses that got condemned? So I thought, oh, okay, I'll get an ingester. And then I heard about the forest, the pine forest at Howard Springs, and it needed thinning. And I thought, oh, maybe I could use that. So I went and had a look at it, dropped the pigs and started to go onto timber. And I started off as Mr. Mulch. I started trading as Mr. Mulch. I used to sell it as garden mulch. And that, people were buying it because it smelt nice and because it lasted so long. But I knew there was essential oil in it, but I couldn't find anything other than, they didn't even know about Baker and Smith at that time. There's no computers, okay, there's nothing. I knew there was something in it, so I started to have it analysed. I had the wood analysed, I had the bark analysed, the sapwood, the heartwood, the bark, the needle. And one day I had to make a truck because it was leaving, because I was sending it down to a friend of mine who was working in Burke, New South Wales, and I had to make the truck. So I started having it analysed. I was sending it to Wollongbar Agricultural Institute in New South Wales, and they were analysing it, okay. And one day I thought, oh well, maybe they'll be able to, I'll just send down the log. I just put this log through and I thought, oh, okay, maybe he can separate the bark and wood, okay, down there. His instructions were to distill it the way that I'd actually presented it. So anyway, he got the stuff, put it in a still, and this is in late 1994, but we get the first GC in 25th of February 1995. But I first did it in late 1994 and went blue. So I sent him down more stuff. That was the bark and the wood, but we didn't realise it was the bark at that stage and doing it until a little bit later. So we sent the next lot down, put it through, and then we realised that we had the reaction between the bark and the wood. Once again, that's documented 25th of February 1995, and we identified guaiacylene. Okay, remember 1910, Baker and Smith, all they identified was guile. They got a blue oil, Baker and Smith, but it wasn't an essential oil. It was an extract from a few different processes to get to it. They'd used really high temperatures, okay, 250 degrees Celsius and things. Anyway, and they'd actually turned the guile into guaiacylene, but that was only just so to prove that it was guile. So then we did it, told the government, and was my life going to change? Absolutely. I went all the way to the High Court. Anyway, it took us around about 2008, 2009, probably 1995. What did that take us? That took us 10 years, over 10 years to get our rights back. And that was when Young Living came in at about 2008, 2009. It only grows up here in the top end and across the Kimberley and parts of Queensland. Once again, Calitris indotropica is the only one registered. It can also be used in for perfumes in therapeutic goods administration products, or TGA, at 1%. And we're making it to a cosmetic standard. The major difference between what's killing the trees is with fires, is the heat. It won't crown fire. The reason for that is because there's a fire suppressant in the actual trees, in the needle. So when you see a fire go through, that doesn't come right into the forest. The grasses are there on the outside, which cause the trees to die from the heat. We've got a lot of introduced grasses such as gamba grass, which came from Botswana. It's actually what elephants normally eat. But we don't have many elephants here. Although some people said the forests were a white elephant, but we've proved them wrong. So anyway, I'll stop it there.